Happy Friday, Baylor College of Medicine, and now I'd like to say, and friends of Baylor College of Medicine, since we have so many other people who apparently are watching our little YouTube videos. But first thing, again, I want to do another shout out this week. The main shout out, by far, is to the teachers who are trying to deal with this pandemic with some direction, but a lot of us just dumping the responsibility on them to provide a safe environment for our kids. I'd also like to do a particular shout out to St. Agnes Academy and Coach Hollinger, who's both a physics teacher and the coach of the girls basketball team. Who would have guessed that they actually follow us here? So I'm very pleased about that, and we will be sending you a picture, so hang on for that in the near future. So, the big experiment that fascinates me is colleges. And, you could ask yourself, what does a motorcycle rally in South Dakota have to do with colleges in the United States? Well, it turns out a lot. Both with the same kind of hope for success without a lot of planning in advance. So what happened in Sturgis, unbelievable, over 365,000 people from all over the country end up in Sturgis for a rally from August 7th to August 16th. Probably the outdoor activities weren't so bad, but lots of indoor bars, lots of concerts indoors. And guess what? A few weeks after, the Midwest lights up and is now the hot spot of the United States. And there's been some really fascinating cell phone data to show exactly what happened. You can see all the people congregating, and then you can see them all afterwards going back into the various states around South Dakota. And not surprisingly, there have been major outbreaks in each of those states. And at least 100 of them have been attributed and actually traced to the Sturgis rally. You can probably multiply that times 5 or 10 to get to the true number. So clearly, having events like that, where you aggregate a bunch of people, a big congregation of people, indoor activities, is just a formula for disaster. Well, so colleges open up. Well, people from all over the country aggregate in a community in some indoor activities and fraternities and dormitories, and guess what? We're having outbreaks. So I don't want to, get on the backs of the presidents of the universities too much, but kind of like, well, what are they thinking? You know this is going to happen. So it's been interesting. I think I've identified one of the failures in the process. So if you start looking at the colleges where there have been, outbreaks, in Iowa, where University of Iowa and Iowa State are, in Minnesota, even SUNY Anianto had 100 cases, and University of Alabama over 1,000. Recently, Georgia College, 8% of the student body testing positive. And what I would say is each of those presidents had a plan for bringing kids in. The plan was, sort of quarantine for a few days, as many of them get tested, and then show up on campus. The problem is you need to have some plan for when there's an outbreak, because inevitably there's going to be an outbreak. So what is the plan for an outbreak, and what are you going to do with the kids? So I have to recognize some successes. So I was in Durham, North Carolina this past weekend. Duke has done a really good job. What did they do? Well, they had kids quarantined. They tested every single kid before they came in. They're running about a third of the total student body population at a time. And then they're testing them every 2 to 3 days. So they are going to detect an outbreak. So they had a plan to find outbreaks. And then they also have a plan for what to do if they find them. It's to isolate kids. Now, I'm pretty sure Rice is doing something similar. I know Duke and Rice have been talking. I think those are plans that not only you have a plan for entry into the college, but you have a plan for surveillance and isolation. My old friend Bobby Robbins, who used to be the CEO of TMC, borrowed a little bit of a playbook of ours, which is to look at the microbiome. So University of Arizona, which has thousands, 50,000 kids, all showing up on campus. What they've done is look at wastewater from each of the dormitories. And it turns out coronavirus is not only expressed in your nasopharynx, but it's in saliva. It's our laboratory knows that you also excrete it in the urine, and it's excreted in the feces. So by looking at wastewater, you can detect early on people who are beginning to shed virus. And they were able to find one dorm that had positive in the wastewater and went back and isolated the kids that were positive. So there are strategies that can be used, but oh my goodness, you gotta plan. That leads me to something we're doing with the city. So our microbiome program, it really outstanding. We started that 9 years ago, and they have been collaborating to look at the 39 plants in the city of Houston and other regional counties. And right now it's more of a study. They've been looking at spikes in the wastewater. And by doing that, they have been able to predict about 10 to 11 days in advance of when people start having PCR positive tests by nasal swab. So this is a great opportunity to begin to look at how can you monitor congregate settings, whether it's a prison or a community or a dormitory or a nursing home. These are great opportunities for us to do better at early on identification of potential outbreaks and then intervening very quickly. So we're very much involved with that. I think we'll hear a lot more about that in the coming days. Now, what about elementary schools and kids in K through 12? There was an absolutely fascinating paper that was published just recently in JAMA that describes an outbreak in China. And you have to think about when this happened. This was in January. And there was a Buddhist retreat, and there were 128 folks that were going to this Buddhist retreat. It was located in Zhejiang province, and the name of the city was Ningbo City. And it just so happens that they had two buses. They divided the people into two groups. This is in January, so they weren't wearing masks, and they went off to this Buddhist retreat. It's about 700 kilometers outside of Wuhan. Well, one of the folks got sick, and it was the index case. And how do they know it's the index case? Well, they had just had dinner with folks who were friends from Wuhan. This person developed symptoms 3 days in advance of everyone else, so it was pretty clear that was the index case. Well, that index case was on a bus with about 60 people. The other bus had 60 people. They all went off to this Buddhist retreat, and they came back. Well, about 35% of the ones that were in the bus with the infected person got sick. And very interesting because if you look at it, it was mostly on the inner rows of the bus. People were immediately next to them. Wasn't within just 6 feet, so it's pretty clear that there was aerosolization. And when they look back, the bus has air conditioning, but it was set on no external air, so it was internal recirculated air. The people who were sitting next to the 5 windows that were open did not get sick. So it's a real simple study. One bus, they all went to the same retreat. One bus had nobody get sick because there was no index case. There was one index case in another bus. About a third of the people got sick. It was from recirculating air, no ventilation, all with a single index case. The people who were by windows did okay. So that should give us some insight into when we start clustering people in classrooms, what do we need to do? We need to make sure that there's proper ventilation. We want to make sure that we just don't have recirculating closed air. If there are windows, open up the windows. If there are doors, open up the doors. If you can teach outdoors, teach outdoors. We also know that masks work. So this is a group of people in a bus without masks early on in the pandemic in January. We now know a lot more. So I think we have enough information to be able to do things safely, but we have to learn from these lessons. We learn from Sturgis, learn from the bus trip outside of Wuhan. These are all opportunities for us to learn and act appropriately. I want to just finish with the data from our own Texas Medical Center, and it's the 9 surrounding counties. We're doing very well. I mean, it is really looking good. Our RT, our effective reproduction rate, was down below 1, actually quite low, down 0.86. For the first time in a long time, our daily new case rate is under 1,000. It was 851. We need that still to get down to 200, and our case positivity rate, test positivity rate, is under 5%. So we are clearly getting there, and it shows again, public health measures work. And if we stick to it, we should all do well. Now the problem, of course, is we're waiting for Labor Day. And with Labor Day and schools opening up, just to be perfectly honest, you know there's going to be a spike. So we know there's going to be a spike. So I don't want everybody to get depressed and miserable when there is one, because we're going to have one. But it also shows that if we start being more rigorous about mask wearing and social distancing, we can control this virus. Now, I just want to say there was one other somewhat disappointing bit of news, that AstraZeneca stopped their trial with their vaccine. This is the Oxford vaccine using adenovirus. And lots of commentary on the news, people very upset about it, so I'm talking about a serious setback. Not so much. Adenovirus is an interesting virus. It's often used, or at least in this particular clinical trial, is being used as the way to introduce the coronavirus proteins. Adenovirus has been along for a long time. It causes a flu-like illness, often in children in daycare settings. The reason it is used to package other viral proteins is it's like a 747. I mean, it is big, it's a DNA virus, it's easily engineered, you can put stuff in it, it's easy to replicate, it's easy to give. So it's been around for a long time. It was started actually as a gene therapy vector. You could put genes in that needed to be replaced, give it an adenovirus and give it to people. That didn't work so well because one of the problems is you get this really intense immune response to adenovirus. And so a lot of times the genes that you're putting in didn't take. But it is promising as a vaccine. It has been used a lot in cancer treatments. But for a vaccine trial, think about it, we're giving normal people, people who are well, something that's supposed to protect them. If anybody gets sick, you've got to stop and make sure that it's not a complication of the treatment. Adenovirus is so common, if you give an adenoviral vector to 30,000 people, there's going to be some people who get sick. They're going to have an immune response because they've had adenovirus before. So I'm sure the folks at AstraZeneca are trying to figure out, is it a complication of the coronavirus proteins that are in there, or is it a complication of just the adenovirus vector that is an occasional immune response that is anticipated? I personally was not surprised at all that the adenoviral vectors are going to be producing some immune response in people, but we'll have to see. There are other ways of doing the vaccines. As you know, there's the direct RNA vaccine, that's Moderna's vaccine. And there's some old-fashioned vaccines going on. The Chinese government is using killed coronavirus along with aluminum, alum it's called. This is like from the 30s, very non-toxic. You give it to people. The alum induces a very brisk response. So cells come in and identify the viral proteins and get an immune response. Now, the reason killed virus vaccines may not be as effective as specific protein vaccines is because there's a lot of different proteins in that virus that may or may not be useful in creating an immune response that prevents disease. So anyway, lots of news, a lot of positive stuff going on. Some goofy stuff where people aren't paying a lot of attention to the epidemiology, the obvious public health issues. I wish people would be a little bit more consistent about that. But as I finish today, the thing I want to point out is there's lots to be optimistic. I mean, for the first time from my perspective, we've got a lot to think about. I think by the end of next year, we might start being normal again. It's really important to be thinking this is another year of this that we're going to have to deal with. It's going to take a while to get a vaccine. Vaccine's going to be great, but we can control this with public health measures. For the first time, seeing these numbers come down with the R value less than 1 and the testing rate under 5%, these are real positive developments. I have been pushing the mayor's office to try and open up more outdoor dining so we can get some more positive back in our lives. But I do see an end to this, and we are going to get through this, but it is going to take patience. We're going to have to get another I think 6 months to a year of mask wearing, and probably we're not going to be shaking hands anytime in the near future. But anyway, have a great weekend. We'll all be sitting around watching for the spike from Labor Day, but there's a lot to be positive about. So have a great weekend, and I will see you next week. Bye.